Given out of the New Who reviews I've done so far, I've done a 9th, a 12th and a 10th Doctor story, and I'm saving anything 13th Doctor related for later, it seemed only logical that I should tackle the 11th Doctor for this review, and there are no shortage of fascinating stories from his era to look at. However, I've done several complex stories in a row now, and sometimes I just think, I don't want to go into depth about complex themes or characters, I just want to rant at some utterly god-awful Doctor Who, and, well, as good as it sometimes could be, unfortunately the 11th Doctor's era has no shortage of episodes to choose from with this goal in mind. But Dinosaurs on a Spaceship is such a total and complete antithesis to what I like and enjoy about Doctor Who, I think it had to be the one here. It has a stupid spectacle-based premise, painfully bad comedy, a total tonal mismatch, and doesn't bother to explore anything related to its plot, themes or characters because it barely has any. Now, I do admit, I'm going into this with a mindset that is probably not conducive to enjoying it under any circumstances, and that's just because what I enjoy about Doctor Who is not present here. Some of you adore silly campy Who, and that's fine, all power to you. Some of you love Paradise Towers and think it's a work of genius. I think it's a miserable, unpleasant disaster. Diversity of opinion is one of the traits that makes us human, so please do be aware, everything I say here is just my opinion, I don't discount yours if it's different. Having said all that, this kind of episode is a good way to rile me up, because all too often, the excuse for it is that it's just a bit of fun, as if that in any way excuses shoddy storytelling. I don't care how fun it is. If your plot is stupid, characters weak, dialogue poor, and tone mismatched, then to me it's not a bit of fun, it's a bit of crap. And that's the thing with this episode. Sure, it's a goofy premise that doesn't want to take itself seriously, but that in no way excuses the terrible wandering plot, cardboard characters, and massive tonal problems. If it managed to do all of that right, I'd be perfectly happy to accept it on its merits and enjoy it, even if it doesn't provide anything for me on an intellectual level. Even in this era of Doctor Who, and even by this writer. Oh right, yeah, the writer. This episode was written by one Mr. Chris Chibnall, who, for those of you who've been in a coma for the last 6 years or so, became showrunner with less than impressive results. I don't want to hold a negative reaction against his time in a big chair against him here. Firstly, because I don't need that reason if I want to bash him. The actual contents of the episode are more than enough in that respect. And secondly, because writing and producing an entire era yourself is a very, very different thing from being given a brief and working to it. That's the thing, this was a stupid idea to begin with, and while Chibnall could have done a hell of a lot better than he did, I'm also willing to place the blame on Stephen Moffat here. Me blaming Moffat for something unheard of. My first and perhaps biggest concern with this episode is the stupid and frankly lazy concept. I refuse to believe this came about in any other way other than, what if there were dinosaurs on a spaceship? That would be so cool! And given Moffat's clear preference for spectacle over substance, he doesn't get the benefit of the doubt here. Apart from the obvious, which is this is an appalling way to create concepts for fiction designed to be consumed by anyone over the age of 9, this isn't a way to create a story. I'll give it an example. Another high concept episode title from the Moffat era is Vincent and the Doctor, which again can be summed up in barely more words than there are in the title. Vincent van Gogh meets the Doctor. But that episode, while far from flawless, is about more than that. It's about exploring Van Gogh's character and how meeting the Doctor would have affected him based on what we know, as well as looking at how it affects the Doctor and Amy as well. Despite being a simple high concept idea, it comes with a strong character-based concept baked in, which gives it a solid foundation to work off, even if the BBC does insist putting a pointless monster in. Dinosaurs on a Spaceship does not do this. It is a title that implies there are dinosaurs on a spaceship. There isn't a character or thematic or political story inherent to that, it's just the same as a child waving some dinosaur figures alongside their toy of the Millennium Falcon, and hey, I'm not discounting that as a possibility to how this idea was thought up. Chris Gillan got a hell of a lot wrong with this, but frankly he was set up to fail because even Robert Holmes at his best would have struggled to make anything out of this. The best I can think of is trying to make a mystery out of it. Why are there any dinosaurs on the spaceship? And let that shape the story as the mystery unravels. Even with that though, there's a problem with A, how to give it a satisfying conclusion, as it was because of the Silurians doesn't strike me as good enough to be the centre of the plot, which, to be fair, it's not, so it's now Chris Chibnall 1, Common Sense 143. And B, how to stretch it out to 45 minutes without adding lots of other stuff to distract, which is where all the other problems come from. You may be thinking I'm asking too much and that Doctor Who is a silly family sci-fi show where it doesn't matter if there's nothing deeper to it. To which I say, raise your expectations. About 3 or 4 months into the show's run nearly 6 decades ago, it had been established that Doctor Who was more than that, and that's why it's run for so long, gave it an extremely dedicated fanbase and a place in the popular culture of this country. Proper storytelling with characters and themes is not too much to ask from this show at this point, and it is extremely difficult to achieve with episode concepts that begin with the phrase, wouldn't it be cool if there were... ... Also, I hate to say this, but dinosaurs and Doctor Who have always been sort of crap. I spent much of my last Moffat era reviews saying so, but throughout its history they've never been impressive. Invasion of the Dinosaurs, for instance, is infamous for its dogshit special effects, which, while classic Who can't really be judged on its effects, it did contribute to the dinosaurs of that story being dull, ineffectual, mindless monsters, which added nothing to the overall plot of the story. In the end, dinosaurs are difficult to do convincingly on Doctor Who's budget, and as mindless creatures they can't really be anything or add anything other than just being monsters. Frankly, the most interesting thing dinosaurs have done in Doctor Who is to be wiped out by Adric. So, already we have a stupid spectacle-driven idea based on a concept that's not very interesting in the first place. We're starting at a bit of a disadvantage, unfortunately. But while that was undoubtedly Moffat's doing, Chibnall was the one who actually wrote the script. And in case I haven't been clear, I'm not of the opinion he did a very good job. Let's be positive for a moment, because there are one or two tiny things that do just about work. The only person who, in my view, walks away from this with their dignity more or less intact is Matt Smith, who is clearly giving his all to this stupid story. I'm generally pretty sympathetic to Smith, even in particularly bad episodes throughout his run, because I don't think the character of the 11th Doctor was particularly written to his strengths, and this episode is a perfect example of that. The dreadful comedy he's given to perform is just painful. Again, Smith is clearly trying, and I don't blame him at all, but it just doesn't play to his strengths, and it comes across as awkward and stilted. Speaking quickly and getting exasperated is not, in fact, inherently comedic, and it does a disservice to the actor and audience to suggest otherwise. And yet Moffat insisted on doing it throughout his entire run. And yet, the best scenes of the episode are the ones where Smith is allowed to play the role seriously, and he excels at this. His genuine anger at the bad guy almost comes across as threatening, and I do genuinely believe that he is as dangerous as we're always told he is in this era. You can see the echoes of Troughton in his performance, that the light-hearted moments are always a facade, and the Doctor is always looking to be in control of a situation, and it's in the moments of pure disgust at the bad guy that the mask slips. Here Smith excels, and it's a pity the lighter-hearted moments weren't written more to his strengths rather than talking quickly and being wacky, as I don't doubt he could have come much closer to matching Troughton in that regard. But despite how mixed it is, Smith gets credit for maintaining his professionality through all this rubbish, and giving a decent performance despite it. I should be fair to the other actors as well, and say they're also trying their best. Mark Williams, for instance, is obviously doing his best despite the material he's given me total and utter cack. David Bradley does have moments of menace, but unfortunately he sometimes comes across as quite flat. He's talking about being a mass murderer with a tone of voice you might expect for him having somewhat of a need to go for a poo. Yes, I'm willing to put on a director, as he certainly can, and indeed in this franchise has done better. As for Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill, well, they're just doing Amy and Rory, really. If you like Amy and Rory, you'll probably think this is fine. If not, then you probably won't. These characters and performances were well-known quantities by this point, to be frank. As I mentioned the director, I better talk about the production before I go full-on about the script. Said director was Saul Metzstein, for whom this was his debut. He also directed several other Series 7 episodes, but hasn't returned beyond that. His performance here is mixed. As I said, he doesn't get a great performance out of his actors, especially Bradley, who he should have done much better with. But on the flip side, he's a pretty decent director visually. For instance, I noticed he had a signature shot throughout this episode of looking on the character outwards from a screen they're looking at, which definitely was something different visually. Aside from that, there's a generally good sense of atmosphere preserved throughout the first half or so of the episode, as far as the script allowed by the script anyway, and some of the exterior shots when they're on the beach is quite nice, so it's sometimes sloppy, but it's a serviceable job. The production designers also do a decent job. The spaceship set works pretty well for what it is, and the dinosaurs themselves, well, the one Triceratops that actually does anything, is pretty emotive and does have the right amount of personality, so yeah, I'll give them that. Otherwise, not really much to comment on. Anyway, how much longer have I need to put off the inevitable? The script. Now, first of all, a big problem is the common one throughout New Who, that it's paced in a way that would make your average 100-metre sprinter ask to slow it down a bit. It's a natural consequence of the 45-minute format, which we've been over before and I'm not going to dwell on, but a setup basically has to be done in about 2 minutes, which leads to, oh look, here's an Egyptian queen, oh no, there's a spaceship coming and India wants the Doctor to fix it, oh better get a hunter first, even though the Doctor doesn't actually know there's going to be any animals yet, but oh well, what's a plot hole between friends? And then they get Amy and Rory, but also his dad, ha, hilarity ensues, oh look, we're on a spaceship, oh look, dinosaurs, and then there's a short respite with the opening titles. Now, you may think that's unfair, but it also takes place so quickly there's no room to breathe or take anything in. Allow the new characters, of which there are 3, let's not forget, to be properly introduced and the importance of the plots being established to sink in. Part of it is the New Who format, true, but also I suspect bringing this up to 4 minutes or so by cutting some of the shittier jokes later on might not have been too much of a sacrifice to make. Also, as I alluded to, the plotting is very sloppy. The Doctor has given zero indication he'd have any need for a hunter to come along, so the best guesses we are for picking one up is that A, he read the script, or B, getting him to hook up with Nefertiti was the plan all along and the Doctor is the cleverest third wheel of all time. You decide which is more plausible. Also, he gets crossed with Indian military lady who suggests missiles. Oh, come off it, for all you know the fucking thing is empty. Yes, sending you to check what's on board first is a good plan of action, which is the one she's taking. But if it turns out to be empty, then making sure an empty spaceship doesn't crash into the Earth, putting countless lives in danger, is a pretty good trade-off, I'd say, and the Doctor I think would never be so reflexively anti-weapon that he'd think that. Unfortunately, the whole story is like this plotting-wise. For instance, they talk about how they've teleported, and are then surprised to find out they're still on the ship. Well, where did you think you teleported, you fucking dumbasses? You're just filming it in South Wales, you haven't actually gone there. Also, it transpires this is a Silurian ship, as some of them left the planet instead of going underground when the moon came, which is a direct link to Doctor Who and the Silurians, which I like, but it's also a bad sign when the best thing this episode can do is remind me of a story that is vastly, vastly superior to this one. So that's fine, but that was millions of years ago. For a ship millions of years old, it looks like in pretty good nick. And what about the dinosaurs? They're clearly not in cryosleep, but our Silurians were, so what? They were just left alone for millions of years to just breed and carry on? In any case, the bad guy wants the dinosaurs because they're valuable. Just generically valuable, I suppose, not like there's a specific buyer lined up or anything. Just going to put them on space eBay and see what he can get. And clearly these dinosaurs are very valuable, so he's perfectly happy to commit mass murder of the Silurians to get hold of them. So, naturally, when he sees the utterly world-famous legendary Nefertiti, which we'll get to, he's perfectly happy to shoot one dead. A bit like deciding the best way to get hold of a diamond is to flush all your gold down the loo. Surely it would have been much better if he had just threatened it, and the Doctor had called his bluff, knowing he wouldn't harm it if it was valuable. This therefore logically leads him to threatening the humans instead, leading to the Doctor's worst dilemma, choosing between people he cares about and the greater good. Just applying a bit of common sense improves the scene and shows the weaknesses of both the Doctor and the villain. They care too much about what matters to them, even if those things are very different. But that's what we could have had, and very much not what we get. The climax is also full of bollocks like this, even ignoring the fact that the Indian government appears to be unilaterally deciding to destroy this thing by themselves, something which I think you'd probably need to speak to the UN or something first. They're launching missiles with no destruct function, an extremely basic safety feature that all modern surface-to-air missiles have, because, well, there wouldn't be a plot otherwise. The Silurian ship just happens to have a control system that requires two related people to work. Pretty big coincidence, as it happens to be the one time we have a companion and his dad around. Again, because without it, we wouldn't be able to watch them goofily fly this CGI ship, and how are we all to do without that? Also, this is something that's just bugging me, rather than something that's actually that much of a problem, but everyone spends the whole story acting as if Nefertiti is this ultra-famous historical figure that everyone knows about, to the point where she's an idol to Amy, and well-known enough to the bad guy that he knows she's worth a lot. And I'm just thinking, are you all confusing her for Tutankhamun? Because he's the actual Egyptian pharaoh everyone's heard of. Never mind the coincidence of the Doctor happening to bring her along at this time. As someone with a lifelong interest in history and a degree in it, albeit modern history, I was somewhat aware of her, and my interest is surely well above average, so it's not as if she's going to be well known among the general population. Also, if you are going to have her basically be an idol to Amy, maybe explore that a bit, rather than it just being something you mention and then never bring up again. I don't know, seems like if you're going to say something you might as well use it. Anywho, I could go on. For instance, why does Amy wait for ages to call the Doctor and Rory instead of, as soon as they disappeared? I know the meme is she doesn't care about Rory, but damn. I think you get the idea, though. You may defend all that by saying, well, that's nitpicking, to which I say, no it isn't. Complaining about a sonic screwdriver being the wrong colour, or the Doctor talking about the wrong planet in regards to some 70s Pertwee cereal, that's nitpicking. Wanting the plot to be consistent and make sense is not nitpicking, because part of the suspension of disbelief in watching television is that the world we're seeing is one that's consistent with itself and doesn't leave gaping holes that we can clearly see. This also comes down to another major problem with the episode, which is tone. See, this plot logic stuff only really matters in the dramatic work. I'm obviously not going to watch Monty Python and go, wow, that makes no sense they stand in the forest saying knee all the time, 0 stars, because obviously it's a comedy and the suspension of disbelief allowed is much more greater if it's for comedic effect. And if Dinosaurs on the Spaceship had just gone all out as a farce, then well, I'd have been unlikely to truly enjoy it, but at least I would have respected it going for a consistent tone and taking the flaws in the plot for comedy. But the problem is, we're just going between two scenes, from the bad guy admitting to the mass murder of the Silurians by pushing them out of the airlock one by one in a horrifying manner, to a testicles joke, and then riding and playing fetch with a Triceratops. The tone is just horrifically inconsistent from moment to moment. We go from Rory and Brian bonding over the stupid two people of the same genes needed to pilot the ship for some fucking reason bollocks I already mentioned, just to the Doctor deciding to leave the bad guy to die, which we'll get to. Its total inability to commit to being serious or comedic leaves the whole thing weakened as a result. It clearly wants its cake and to eat it too, and it just doesn't work. As it happens, neither the dramatic or comedic beats work all that well on their own, but even if they had, the way the episode is structured means they just fight each other for space and leave the overall tone very confused. So the natural question you may be asking is, why doesn't this work when something like City of Death is considered one of the greatest stories of all time, and is frankly one of the least controversial answers to that question? Well, let's ignore the fact that the drama is effective and the comedy funny. The thing is with City of Death is that the structure allows enough space between the jokes and the drama. Kerensky's death, for instance, is a particularly gruesome moment that happens to not so go into jokes into the very next scene. But also it's a matter of timing. The chase to the TARDIS to stop Scarif from wiping out the human race is concluded by the most obviously comedic scene in the story, a literal member of Monty Python mistaking the TARDIS for a piece of art. It's allowing for a joke to be a relief to the drama, interrupting it briefly before we return to the serious matters. These structural factors are totally missing from Dinosaurs on the Spaceship. There's no time to process and react to the news of the Silurians' horrifying demise before we're talking about Brian's balls. The joke isn't a relief to the dramatic plot, or conversely, the drama a way of adding gravitas to a comedic plot. It's just suddenly shifting focus from the drama to comedy without putting any thought into it. Although, chiefly, yeah, would probably help if the jokes were better. Which neatly brings us on to the next topic. As comedies go, this is really, really fucking bad. It was about halfway through the episode when I realised I had not laughed once, and this surprisingly enough did not change as the episode continued. Apart from the usual Moffat era, the Doctor is going to talk quickly and act wacky and somehow it'll end up funny bollocks, it's always about as funny as an anaesthetic-free root canal, we get some really, really bad sex jokes, which have to be handled with the utmost care in a show like Doctor Who, and you can guess how well that's done. Of course, I've already mentioned the terrible balls joke, and there are more, where the joke is, I say a thing that loosely relates to the thing I'm talking about.
Whoever was running this vessel left in a hurry.
Maybe a plague came and took them.
No, it'd be corpses and bones.
Unless the animals ate them.
Whoa, Chuckle Brothers, lighten up, would ya?
Haha, it's funny because there are two of them, and there are two Chuckle Brothers, and they're funny. Yeah. Of course, nothing highlights how bad this episode's comedy is than the comedy relief robots, TM. Bringing in Mitchell and Webb was a great idea to bring some comedy in, and as someone who likes their sketch shows a lot, I'm all for it. So imagine the crushing disappointment they don't do anything Mitchell and Webbish at all. They have one joke. They're posh and stuffy robots. That's it. That's the entire joke.
We're very cross with you. You're going straight on the naughty step. He's not interested in you.
Look, you need to learn some manners.
No, you need to learn some manners.
No, you do.
No, you do, Mr. Manners.
Did you call?
What are you doing? Stop them!
All right, don't shout.
See? They're posh and stuffy. It's a really funny joke. Oh, what a waste. Also, the worst joke of the lot.
I will take you apart cog by cog and melt you down when all this is over.
Oh, I'm so scared. Actually, I might be. A little bit of oil just came out.
Ah, yes, a pee joke. Glad to see we're being so complex and sophisticated with our posh robot humour. Fucking kill me. So, the humour is staggeringly unfunny. The drama is no better. In fact, it's not even funnier, like with something like Dragonfire, where at least one can take great amusement in how shit everything is. Nope, it's just really bad. The setup for the story early on is piss poor. For instance, we hear the bad guy knows who the Doctor is. Ooh, interesting. Until it turns out he wants an actual Doctor. Okay, good to see the solutions are over-reliance on nostalgia to promise nostalgia, then not actually deliver on it. It's not as if him thinking he's a regular Doctor matters, as the Doctor pretty much does everything a normal Doctor might anyway, with some pretty unpleasant squelching as he deals with the injuries, I might add. So that goes nowhere fast. I've already talked about how the bad guy is a complete idiot, so I won't dwell on it again. I will, however, comment on the fact that this plot seems so completely uninterested in actually talking about anything interesting it might bring up. For instance, the dilemma of whether saving the dinosaurs is worth risking any human lives down on Earth, and the Doctor knowing the answer deep down but being very reluctant to sacrifice the dinosaurs to bring it about, would have been a great moral quandary and would have added weight to what he eventually did with the bad guy. I mean, this is not complex or difficult stuff to add. Genuinely, this could be achieved in about a minute or two, and wouldn't have required cutting that many of the shit jokes to make room, but no, not even an attempt. The climax is poorly put together as well. Now, I don't have to tell you it requires a technical babble arse Paul. Apparently just switching signals is enough to make these apparently unchangeable missiles decide to change target, which happily saves the day in one sentence. As for the rest, we'll get to that. So the dramatic plot is very weak and doesn't work, but hey, at least the characters are crap as well. This is of course the introductory episode for Brian Williams, who of course would play a bit more of an important role in The Power of Three a few episodes later. As I said, Mark Williams does as well as he can, but his material was just so bad. He's there to act bewildered and that's about it. There's some potential in a fish-out-of-water character in this way maybe, but I preferred it when it was done previously, and the character was played by Camille Codry. Amy and Rory are just here, Amy to exposit a lot and awkwardly flirt with the Doctor while her husband is within earshot, and Rory to just sort of be there. Oh no, at one point the bad guy gets a robot to shoot Brian because he's the bad guy, and Rory treats him because he's a nurse. Or a doctor, I forget which. Anyway, this is a characteristic, not characterization. Should be pointed out that they are very different things, but that's about as much as we're going to get. Oh yeah, and there's 2 new characters for this episode. The ultra-famous, well-known Queen Nefertiti and Riddle the Hunter from the 1900s. Now, as I previously mentioned, the Doctor had no idea this was going to involve animals, so bringing along a hunter was a stroke of luck in that respect. But otherwise he's there to shoot dinosaurs and chew bubblegum, and he has more than enough bubblegum left, so he's actually going to be quite shite at the former, but that's beyond the point. He hasn't got any real character beyond that, apart from, isn't everyone in the past sexist? Which, yes, I suppose a hunter from 1902 is going to be a bit of a sexist. Got anything to say about that? No, I didn't think so. Oh, and after one bickering session about 10 minutes into the episode, at the very end we found out the 2 of them have gone back to 1902 together because of all the chemistry they showed and how much they grew to care for each other. In their one scene, where they bicker about 35 minutes earlier, as I said. So yeah, not exactly wowing us so far, is he? This brings us to the Doctor and the bad guy, which are the only interactions of the stories that even be slightly interesting. As I said earlier, Smith does a very good job of showing the Doctor's utter contempt for him, and it's believable how nasty a piece of work he is, but that's the problem, isn't it? There's not really much else to it, particularly as I've already talked about how much of a blockhead the bad guy actually is. And this leads to the ending, which I have a big problem with. After techno-babbling the missiles to target the bad guy ship, he tries pleading with the Doctor, who just ignores him and leaves him to die. This I dislike. I'm not saying I like the idea of the Doctor as the ultimate pacifist, with that I never would bullshit or anything like that. That is bollocks. But equally, I'm not comfortable with the idea of the Doctor as judge, jury, and executioner. Yes, the bad guy is a monster, who should be held accountable for murdering the Silurians, but I tend to think that should be in a proper court of law, not the Doctor becoming the self-appointed arbiter of justice and killing him as a result. I like to contrast this to Resurrection of the Daleks, where the Doctor went to kill Davros, someone who had killed infinitely more people than this guy through creating the Daleks, and the Doctor couldn't do it, simply admitting he lacks Davros' practice. Killing in such a way, even as someone as evil as Davros, is not in his nature. The Doctor can kill, but it's only in extreme circumstances. The most obvious example is Shockeye, who he killed in obvious self-defense. Killing the bad guy in this episode in this way, it strikes me as unheroic, and as looking at the character of the Doctor in a deeply cynical way. I'd have much preferred that if he had saved him, then handed him over to the authorities at the end. For someone obsessed with acquisition and wealth, spending the rest of his life behind bars with nothing except the prison clothes on his back, that's a much more fitting end than being executed by our hero in my view. But even if this is the way you want it, it's still possible to do this. Just have it so the Doctor is aware of what he's become. Amy can ask him if he was doing the right thing there, and he grimly responds, probably not. A tiny bit of self-awareness of these situations can add so much to the characters, but there's nothing. Nout, zilch, nada. That is the problem with the episode, really. Inconsistency and a lack of depth. No thought is given to how to improve these situations or characters to create compelling journeys, anything like that. Indeed, the jokes also have no thought put into them either. This episode is frankly an exercise in phoning it in. Yeah, the concept was dogshit to begin with. Chibnall wasn't making gold out of this, but the shape of the shit he made could have been much more thoughtfully crafted. Final score for this episode, and bearing in mind this is just a measure of how it stands up to the rest of New Who and nothing else, is 2 out of 10. Matt Smith tries his best, and the concept he was handed did Chris Chibnall no favours, but the weak comedy, weaker drama, and poor character work are the finishing blows on a weak, ill-thought-out plot and massive tonal mismatch. While I'm unlikely to ever be a fan of goofy concepts and ideas like this, putting them together with some thought to these things should have been the way forward. Yes, mindless fun ain't for me, but even so, if episodes like this do exist, I'd rather they concentrated on the fun rather than the mindless, and that's very much not what this episode does.